my friends.
Hey, Nerd Night. I'm excited to be here today, and today I want to tell you a story. And the story I want to tell you is about Brooke Bubble Breaks Things, which is a children's book that me and a couple of my friends decided to write a few years ago. Now, as I go through this, I'm going to tell you some things you probably didn't know about children's books and my own thoughts on writing them, but I want you to take everything with a grain of salt because I knew nothing about writing children's books before this, and this is not really what I do. But this starts with what I do. See, by training, I am a scientist, and I studied bubbles and how they break things. And I did this for quite a while. And I have some sexy images of bubbles up here. But on the left, you have this black dot in the middle exploding, and if you look carefully, you might see some rings about it. And what's going on is a bubble is collapsing so fast in water that it is sending off a shock wave, like a sonic boom or an energy wave, that actually can cause damage and break things. And on the right, we have this other sexy bubble, and you can see a jet of water crashing through this bubble. And even though in reality this is only a couple millimeters wide, that jet of water can go up to 12 kilometers a second. Or if a plane was going that fast, Mach 36. Anyone who's done a belly flop knows fast water hurts, and it can break things. And I find this really fascinating, and I love how bubbles break things. And I'm not going to talk that much about it tonight because back in 2014 at Nerd Night 18, where I'm 53 now, I gave a whole thing on how bubbles break things. But I really enjoyed that, and I love geeking out on this topic. And I love geeking out to Nerd Night, but I have to say, you are not my normal audience. Normally, when I am geeking out, the audience is shorter and higher pitched. I work a lot with K-12, STEM and engineering outreach. This is me at the Natural History Museum, teaching people about fluids and other crap. And kids always ask, hey, that's cool, what do you do? And one of my standard lines is, well, I study how bubbles break things. And you always get this really confused and excited look, and then a child telling you that you don't know what a bubble is. And like, it's always a good time. But when you start explaining it to them, people get really interested, which drove the creation of Brooke Bubble Breaks Things. This is our children's book, and my goal in all of this was just to convince many of the 8-year-olds of the world that bubbles can do some damage. This is a book that I co-created with my co-scientist and former lab mate Mark, and our wonderful illustrator who's in the back, Erica. Everyone say hi, Erica. Hi, Erica! She designed those beautiful stickers. And that is the why this exists. But most of this talk is really going to be about the how this exists. See, a few years back, January 2016, I'm sitting there, I'm geeking out, studying my bubbles. And my buddy Mark comes up and he slaps this flyer down on my desk and says, hey, if we combine an art with our engineering, we can get money. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. And he goes, I don't know what to art. Do you have any ideas? And I'm like, you know, I've wanted to make a children's book. And he's like, all right, this seems like a good idea. And like any good scientist with a reasonable idea that we want to pursue, we went to a bar. Went right down to Adventure, right down on Washington, and we sit at happy hour and we're sitting there doodling and drawing our equations on napkins and geeking out about bubbles and collapsing stars and waves and all the stuff we study that we might turn into a children's book while the bartender's just kind of staring at us like, who are these guys? I was like, all right. And we eventually come up with this goal. We're going to create a children's book that teaches children that bubbles break things. All right, we've got a goal, we've got a basic idea, and Mark looks at me and he's like, all right, can you art? And I'm like, no, well, I arted and it stunk. I'm like, can you art? And he's like, no, I can't art. So Mark and I, neither one of us do the art thing. So we start reaching out. We start reaching out to illustrators, and we're like, all right, we've got a couple weeks until this grant is due. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing because it's a bit of a roller coaster. But 36 hours before this grant is due, we have this whole thing finished, and we have no artist. And it's just like, all right, someone, maybe we'll hire. We've got some money, maybe. And long story short, we just ended up sending out an email to our friends. Does anyone know an artist? And it worked out perfectly because we got Erica back there, and she is fantastic. So now we have funding. Well, we almost have funding. We have a grant. We have an idea, and now that we're ready, we go back to the bar. You know, and sitting in the back booth of Hopcat dive right into the local 30 beer list, we submit this grant. And a few weeks later, sitting in that same booth at Hopcat, we get this grant. So I knew this project was going to work because we conceived of it at a bar, we submitted it at a bar, we received it at a bar, and I'm talking about it at a bar. It had to go well. All right, legwork done. Next hurdle, none of us know anything about children's books or how to write them. Small detail. But being good researchers, we do research. We go to the children's book section of the library every Tuesday for an hour and a half for about 6 months. And we just surround ourselves with small screaming children, reading children's books, trying to get an idea of what's going on, listening to words kids use, just getting immersed in that whole thing. And I got an idea, of what children's books actually are. So here's the Children's Book 101. All right, first off, children's books, all of them about 700 words, like a page of text. 24 or 32 pages, never in between, has to do with binding. Just this.
So funny.
Yeah, it's special. Fonts, I love typography. Is anyone else out there a typography nerd? Yeah, I love both of you. This, can someone tell me what letter this is? Awesome. That means you didn't just learn the alphabet. If you had, you wouldn't know what this symbol with the weird hat is. You have to be really careful. If your audience is 5, this is the only A they know.
Oh my gosh.
Other things about children's books. Everything's in 3s. You've heard of 3 blind mice. You've heard of 3 little pigs. You've never heard of the 4 deaf rats. It's not because they were bad at their job. It's because there was 4 of them. Oh. And lastly, as we learned from our professional editors, children must have agency. Adults cannot yell at them and tell them what to do. Important. But here's the real kicker, and here's the thing that threw me, the thing I didn't expect. I don't know about you, but I have this idea of children's books writers, and they're like, okay, I'm going to write this thing, and I know what the pictures are going to be, and all this. And Snoopy sits there, and he writes his manuscript, and he sends it to Bob Ross, and he's like, hey, Bob Ross, illustrate this for me. Bob Ross is like, yeah, Snoopy, I have all these happy illustrations. It'll be great. I'll paint them. No, that's not it. In reality, Snoopy and Bob Ross, they don't even look at each other. They never meet. The authors and illustrators of most of your favorite children's books never meet. Unless it's like a rock star or a do-it-yourselfer like Dr. Seuss. The author does the entire manuscript 30 times, finally gets a publisher to approve it, and then the publisher calls up Bob Ross and is like, hey Bob Ross, we've got this great manuscript, can you illustrate it? And then Bob Ross is like, yes publisher, anything for you. So, this shocked me. I don't know about anyone else, but I really thought Snoopy and Bob Ross would hang. So, now that we knew what a children's book was, we thought the next step was writing, but we started talking to people who actually write these things. We got this great tip, and they're like, develop the hell out of your characters. Your characters drive your story, right? If you know someone deeply and intimately, you think about your best friend or your spouse or someone, if they get in some shit, you roughly know how they're going to react, what they're going to do. It creates a really coherent story if you know your character on an intimate level. So, what we did is we knew we had to have a bubble in here, and we thought, all right, the mantis shrimp is an animal that actually weaponizes bubbles to hunt fish. So, mantis shrimp, fish, these are realistic characters that could be in there. Came up with some characters that could be in there, and then we just went all out, trying to detail everything. And this is a lot of text because I copied and pasted exactly what I had from 2 years ago. But just to give you an overview, Brooke is 6 years old. She's bubbly, initially shy, has a minor childhood Napoleon complex. She runs from responsibility but feels guilty about it later. You know, all that. And I detailed her family tree, and even to really get in her head, I found an address that is a bogus address for a real road in the Florida Keys that corresponds to, between 2 addresses, a bridge, and a place where those shrimp actually live, and where bubbles can exist. So I was like, all right, I am gonna just do this all out. And we did this for the characters, and I have to say, it really made it easier, because then when my character got into trouble, I knew what she was gonna do. She was gonna run away. So we did that, and when you're done, you should be able to create a dating profile, not necessarily Tinder because it's for 6-year-olds, but Facebook at very least for your characters. You have to know them that well. Finally, once you have like some semblance of at least your main characters, you can write. And everyone has their writing process, right? For me, I grab my laptop, I kick my cat Leviathan out of my favorite maternity rocking chair, I make a particularly strong coffee, and then I just let my brain dump. And when I first write something, it is bad. It is like James Joyce, but a million times worse. It is completely incomprehensible. But, you know, once you've got all the ideas, then you can shape them into something useful. And like, children's books, like most Hollywood movies, have a pretty typical narrative structure. All is well initially, but then some problem appears, and then there's a crisis, but your hero solves a problem, and then all is well again. Same with children's books. Kids' books have to have a clear beginning, middle, and end. So for my story, Brooke Bubble, normal Bubble, chilling, hanging out with friends. But she gets these crazy hiccups. That's that collapsing that actually causes breaks. And then her hiccups actually break things and cause real problems, and she runs away from them. But she learns to control her hiccups and solves a problem and saves the day. And it's just like, yes, narrative. So you've got something down, but then like, that's one story. So you just, I had a co-author, so I just kept passing it back and forth. Just back and forth, back and forth. I write, you write. I write, you write.
Oh my
you know, you put on your best fight face, but it doesn't always work. Some of this is awful. But finally, once you have something decent, that's when you can go out and say, I think this is good enough that I can show it to someone who's not working on it and is not responsible for this pile. And feedback, like, I'm a scientist. We have this thing called peer review where we yell at each other about what we do wrong. Like, I am used to getting yelled at for doing wrong things. Like, this is just part of my job. But there is an audience who is way more straightforward and painful than scientists. That's these folk. Like this shit, like this kid does not care how you feel or what you think. She'll give you shit straight up. And they do. So feedback comes in many flavors, right? You've got really useful feedback. We hired a professional editor. It's only $80 for the whole book. She had great things like don't include backstory in a picture book. Things I didn't know. Very useful. You know, we also had my friend Morrow, who's another bubble scientist who had issues with our radius versus time bubble collapse histories, not necessarily syncing with the story. And I'm like, I don't know how to get that into the story. I'm sorry. Thank you for the feedback. You got other people that are just like, hey, this is great. I can definitely do it better. Maybe you don't want me to do it, but I'm just going to redo the whole thing anyway. You're like, thanks, Andrea. And then you have the children who have really, really nice things to say, but sometimes they're just like, I gave you a 99% on words because I had to look up 2 words. I didn't know cavitation, which you're not supposed to, or propeller. And I'm like, yes, I taught them propeller. They learned a thing. Like, book working. Sometimes feedback comes in the form of pictures. We had this read to a kindergarten before they actually finished the start or the illustrations. And the kindergartners sent us their idea of what the pictures should be, somewhat unsolicited, but it was adorable. There's a bubble and it says the hiccups go to the sky, and that's not part of the story, but it's still adorable. This one says, he is a bubble and rainbow bubbles and water and bubbles are sitting. Like, grammar aside, still amazing. Thank you, little kids. And you get this feedback, and then you have to take it and edit things. And our editing usually looked like us sitting in the Duderstadt Center on University of Michigan North Campus, battling this program called InDesign, which is the only piece of software coded purely out of hate. One of us would be on Skype and the rest of us would be fighting this thing. And it's good, but like as you're doing this, there's so many different things pulling you apart. You're like, I want science in there, but I also want a good narrative. And when you finally balance those things, you're like, oh yeah, I need age appropriateness and language and technical accuracy and humor and all the other shit that goes in there. And somewhere I want a moral that children relate to because, you know, bubbles breaking things is great, but there's no moral there. Yeah. Yeah. So you get to that point, and then you have to do what's called killing the baby. And I did not name it this. Killing your babies means taking those things that you love in your script or in your book and axing everything that's not necessarily there. Axing your babies. So to give you an idea, the difference between draft 1 and draft 30, we finished draft 31 last night. Our character got a sex change. She was Ben, now she's Brooke, because I worked in a giant fluids lab and there were no girls. We had tons of characters, now there's only a few. Originally we shot for 5-year-olds, but after reading to a bunch of kids, we figured out 8-year-olds way more receptive. Initially, Bubbles cavitated and collapsed, and now they hiccup. And my baby's language, I love fun words. At one point, I had the shrimp weaponizing Brooke to kill a fish. And that's not okay, so Brooke just hiccups and knocks out the fish. But when it happened initially, Brooke said, "Oh shit," and cursed the heavens in that first draft. Turns out, you can't do that when you're writing for 5-year-olds. Oh shit's not appropriate. Like, no better. There's no replacement for that. You just don't do that. So you go back and you remake all these edits, but it's really more like this. And here's the problem. It's a trap. Like, seriously, every time you edit, it's not always going to be better. Some days you're going to want less words and you'll want it to be shorter and to the point. Sometimes you want it to be more accurate. Some days you want it to be funnier. Like, not all of those edits are always better. At some point, you have to get out of the trap of over-editing and just say, we're done. We did that a few weeks ago. And for us, the compromise was to create a website that went over all of the science and gave people the opportunity to learn a lot more than we could actually teach them in a book tailored for elementary school children. And this was a good compromise. I'm really happy with this. So, and finally, after step 7, there's step 4. All right, illustrations. I say step 4 because we did it in parallel to writing. That was dumb. Learn from our mistakes. Here's why. When you illustrate, things are normally fine. Brief drawing of what you think will be in the book. Our illustrator whipped this up in about 30 seconds. It shocked me. Yeah. But then you end up with gorgeous final drawings that don't get into the book because they just don't fit. Or in this case, like half of it gets cut out of the book. Or you have to try to fit text around pictures. Can't tell you how many times I tried to make the title slide to this because text around pictures is wonky and it's a pain in the ass. I don't recommend it. Finally, once you've got all of that done, you can publish. And that's the stage we're in now, right? And there's a lot of options there. You can self-publish through Amazon CreateSpace. Our wonderful Ann Arbor District Library has the 5th Avenue Press, which publishes for local authors under certain circumstances. The University of Michigan Publishing, which normally does textbooks for professors, was actually interested in publishing this, but wanted more money than we wanted to give them. But they were super nice and useful and gave us lots of good advice. And my final thought to all of you is that if this is the kind of thing you're interested in, I think anyone can do this. I'm not saying anyone can do it well, and it's a ton of work. Like I said, we started in 2016, and we've met pretty regularly since January 2016 working on this. There's really a lot that goes into it. But it's a lot of fun, and it is quite doable, outside of InDesign. But other than that, it's a lot of fun. So with that, I just want to thank all the people that helped with this, because there's a lot of them. I'm going to let that scroll, and then it's going to put up a picture of the website. But in the meantime, when this is done, questions. I am happy to answer them. Thank you all very much for coming. Yay!